What's up, guys? I'm Boxing, and today I'm going to be ranking the top 25 middleweights, in my opinion. And even though there's no boxing at this time, I'm going to be making videos on boxing news or boxing rankings, top 25 rankings, top 15, top 10, whatever. So first of all, at number one, I'm giving it to Canelo Alvarez, 53-1, 2 draws, 36 knockouts. He is currently the Super WBA middleweight champion. He's also a former Super welterweight champion as light heavyweight. He's a former light heavyweight champion, WBO champ at light heavyweight. His title got vacated after he knocked out Sergey Kovalev in the 11th round in November, and that was his last fight. He was supposed to fight Billy Joe Sanders for his WBA super middleweight title, but that fight was postponed, and I believe he would win that fight, being unified champion at super middleweight. But naturally, Canelo's a super welterweight, as he's 5'9", with a shorter reach. In his light heavyweight fight versus Kovalev, Kovalev was using his jab, putting it out there, keeping Canelo at bay. But then when Canelo landed, he knocked Kovalev straight out, knocked him out cold. He landed a huge right hand, knocking Kovalev out into the ropes, and he was out cold. And at number two, I'm giving it to Gennady Golovkin, who's 40-1 with 1 draw and 35 knockouts. He's currently the IBF and IBO world champ. He's from Kazakhstan. He's actually one of my favorite fighters, as I have met him before at the press conference versus Derevyanchenko. I took a few pictures with him. He's a nice fighter. He's a nice guy. And I also saw a couple of his fights versus Lemieux, of Rosado and Stevens, all at the Garden. And he did have a 23-fight KO streak, but that got ended against Daniel Jacobs a couple years back. He's known as a brutal power puncher, but his last fight was a very, very close fight versus Sergey Derevyanchenko, where he won by unanimous decision, but the scorecards were very, very close. I scored a 114-113 for Triple G, but most people scored at that same score, but for Derevyanchenko. But overall, he's a great fighter, and he did have 2 fights versus Canelo Alvarez. That was his draw and his loss. I believe he should have got 2 wins versus Canelo Alvarez, as in both fights I feel like he won, but the judges did not agree. And at number 3, I'm giving it to Demetrius Andrade. He's 29-0 with 18 knockouts. He's currently the WBO middleweight champ. He's coming off a KO versus Luke Keeler. He also has good wins versus Artur Akavov, Maciej Sudecki, and Olantis Fox. He's also the former super welterweight champ, and he, I believe, has made 3 defenses of his WBO title. I'm not too sure. He was supposed to fight Billy Joe Sanders years ago, but that got canceled for whatever reason. And he is talking about fighting Liam Williams after this coronavirus pandemic. And moving on, at number 4, I'm giving it to Jermall Charlo, 30-0, 22 knockouts. He's currently the WBC middleweight champ. He's coming off a KO win versus Dennis Hogan in the 7th round, back on December 7th. And he's also a former super welterweight champ, IBF champion. And he also has wins versus Julian J. Rock Williams at super welterweight. Who else? Brandon Adams, as well as Matt Korobov, which is very controversial. And in the Korobov fight, the judges scored wide for Charlo, which I do not agree with. I scored 7 rounds to 5 for Korobov winning. And in that fight, Charlo did get exposed a little. Korobov was countering him good, and it showed that if he fights some guy who could box like Korobov or any other Olympian or former excellent amateur, that he could get frustrated in that fight and possibly lose. As when I was watching the Korobov fight, he was getting a little frustrated when Korobov was moving around well, dodging his punches and countering with his left hand. And most people scored it 115-113 for Korobov, but the judges didn't see it that way. And he's supposed to be fighting Chris Eubank after this, I believe, as they did talk about that fight a lot. On December 7th, they were talking about that fight a lot, as Eubank has been calling Charlo out for a while. And in that fight, I believe Charlo would win. And moving on at number 5, I'm giving it to Chris Eubank Jr. He's 29-2 with 22 KOs. He's the interim WBA champ. Most people would disagree with me putting him this high. I mean, I'm kind of disagreeing with myself at this point. Maybe he should be lower, maybe number 7 in the world. But when you think about it, he's a former IBO champion. He went to the semifinals in the World Boxing Super Series, and in the process knocking out Abney Yildirim and having a very tough fight versus George Groves. And that's where he got eliminated in the tournament. But he's also another former interim world champ at middleweight. Years back, he was the former interim WBA champion again at middleweight. So he's a 2-time WBA interim champ. And he's a former IBO super middleweight champion as well. And he also has a good win versus James DeGale, which you got to remember, he dropped James DeGale a couple times, then got the unanimous decision victory back in, I believe, February of 2019. And moving on at number 6, I'm giving it to Sergey Derevyanchenko, 13-2 with 10 wins by knockout. He's from the Ukraine, and his last fight was a very controversial close fight versus Triple G, where most people did score Derevyanchenko winning the fight. I scored it for Triple G. The judges scored it a close unanimous decision for Triple G to win. His other loss before was also very close and controversial versus Daniel Jacobs, which was again for a vacant IBF title. And he did lose that fight by split decision, I believe so. I scored it 114-113 for Derevyanchenko to win. Judges scored it. One judge scored it for Derevyanchenko, and the other 2 for Daniel Jacobs. And moving on at number 7, Kyoto Murata. He is the regular WBA middleweight champion. He's 16-2, 13 by KO. In his last fight, he won by KO in the 5th round with Steve Butler. In the U.S., that fight was aired at 2 a.m. As in Japan, I believe they're 12 hours ahead, 11 hours ahead. And I had to watch the fight at 2 a.m. because I wanted to see how the WBA champ looked. He looked very good. He was outboxing. Steve Butler showed true power and he knocked him out. And he also had a win before that, regaining his WBA title versus Rob Brandt. And before that, he did get a loss versus Brandt via decision in a very close fight. Then before that, fighting Hassan Endam, losing, then getting his belt back after. So he's a good fighter, in my opinion. He's very solid. He has a good chin, and he boxes well and has good power. And moving on at number 8, I'm giving it to Jaime Munguia, 35-0 with 28 knockouts. He's a former WBO super welterweight champ, and he's currently, I believe, the WBO International middleweight champion, where he won versus Spike O'Sullivan in his first middleweight fight. But it really wasn't showing anything, because he was, again, fighting a super welterweight who was also moving up. So they were both technically super welterweights at the middleweight limit. And he did really show what he was about, as he did knock out Spike O'Sullivan in the 11th round back in January. And I'm not sure how we'll do against a top contender or for, say, a top champion. But I'm just going to put him at number 7, being that he has great fights at super welterweight, being a former world champion, and he's undefeated with a great record. And at number 9, I'm giving it to Liam Williams, 22-2 with 17 KOs. He's the WBO Eliminator winner, knocking out Alontes Fox in the 5th round. And he's supposed to be fighting Demetrius Andrade, as there was some news that they were talking about possibly fighting soon. Some people would say, oh, why do you have Liam Williams ahead of Liam Smith? I'm saying that in both fights they were very controversial. Second fight, most of the part, where I thought Liam Williams definitely beat Liam Smith. And most people do say the wrong person won that night and it went the distance. Although it was a close fight, most people thought Liam Williams won. And also, Liam Williams in the first fight versus Liam Smith lost by accidental headbutt, where the fight was halted due to a headbutt, which was accidental, and it was the 8th round. So they should have went to the scorecards, but for whatever reason they did not. But in his last fight, he really showed why he's a top contender, knocking out Alonkus Fox, whereas the current WBO champion went 12 rounds with Fox. And he did pick him apart, but he didn't stop him like Liam Williams did, so you got to give him props for that. And moving on, I have Liam Smith at number 10. He is 29-2 with 1 draw and 16 KOs. He's a former interim WBO super welterweight champion. One of his losses was to Jaime Munguia back in HBO, and that was for Munguia's WBO title, as he was putting his interim title on the line as well. Win or lose, his belt would have been gone, and he lost, so he wasn't a champ anymore. And he has some wins on the zone. In his last fight, he had a good winner of the zone. And I believe he went the distance in that fight. I'm not sure. But I believe his last fight was in November. I'm not sure if I'm correct. You can correct me in the comments. But I'm pretty sure it was on one of the November shows. Either the KSI versus Logan Paul or the Kovalev versus Canelo card. And moving on, at number 11, I'm giving it to Jeff Horn from Australia. He's 20-2 with 13 KOs. He's currently the WBO and WBA Oceania champion, as he is from the Oceania area in Australia. He is a former WBO welterweight champ. His only defeats are to Michael Zarafa by TKO, as well as Terrence Crawford by TKO. The Terrence Crawford loss was actually an embarrassment for him, as he was coming in as champ, beating Manny Pacquiao, which I did not think he beat Pacquiao. I thought Pacquiao won comfortably, 117 to 111, but they robbed Pacquiao in that fight. I gotta be honest, Pacquiao has been robbed in a lot of his fights. And moving on Jeff Horn, his loss versus Michael Zarafa, he did avenge. And as in his last fight, he KO'd Zarafa, showing who's boss and who's better in the rankings. And maybe I should have had him higher on the list. Well, not higher in the sense of going up, higher down. Or I should have just said going down in the list. As I feel like maybe Rob Brain, who's below him, may beat him in it if they ever had a fight. But I'm just going to put him there because he's a former world champion. And that he has a win versus Pacquiao, which is on paper that he's a win versus Pacquiao. But if you watch the tape, he lost to Pacquiao. But moving on, I have the former WBA middleweight champion, Rob Brandt, 25-2, 17 KOs. He's from the United States. His title win was versus Ryota Murata, where he won via close decision. It was a unanimous decision, 116-112. I scored it. I saw that fight on Top Rank. I like his style. He fights very good. He was showing the champ who was boss in that fight, taking the title home. But then, when he went to Japan for the rematch with Murata stopped him in round 2, battering him. And really, when I mean battering, I mean Murata battered Brandt and made it look like he was fighting an amateur. But Rob Brandt's other defeat was to Jürgen Braheimer in the World Boxing Super Series, back when the Super Middleweight Series was on, and he was out in the first round. As it was expected, as Rob Brandt was a prospect in the division, and his opponent Braheimer was already a former light heavyweight champion as well as super middleweight champ, and who already had, I believe, 48 plus fights, or 48 plus wins, per se. And I was favoring Braheimer to win that fight, and he did, comfortably outboxing Rob Brandt. And moving on to number 13, I have Michael Zarafa, who's 27-4 with 16 by KO. His best win was definitely versus Jeff Horn, where he won by TKO. But then that loss was avenged. That win was avenged, and it was traded for a loss. As in his last fight, he got TKO'd by Jeff Horn. And both fights, they were very bloody. It was a war, and they were very good fights. But Michael Zarafa, I'm not sure if he moves up, if he'll be good or not. Like, let's say if he fights one of the top 5, top 7 guys, like Murat or Derevyanchenko, they'd pick him apart, in my opinion. And he does have a loss versus Kell Brook on there, and he lost pretty badly, as the scorecards were read as, like, I believe 119 to 109, and that was back of December of 2018, I believe so, or 2017. I'm not sure, guys. Comment down below which year Kell Brook and Zarafa fought. But moving on, at number 14, this is controversial as Korobov does have a few losses on his resume, but he's an excellent boxer, and I believe he should only have 2 losses on there, to Andy Lee and Chris Eubank, as I believe he should be the former WBC middleweight champion, as he did get a loss versus Jamal Charlo, but in my opinion, he beat Charlo, and they robbed him in that fight. One judge had it 119 to 109, which was disgusting, in my opinion. I scored a 115, 113 for Korobov. I don't think it would have been bad if it was a draw, or maybe 115, 113 for Charlo, because, man, I thought Korobov won that fight. Korobov was basically outboxing Charlo in the earlier rounds from, I believe, rounds 1 to round 5, he won. Then Charlo picked up the other 2 rounds. Then Korobov won rounds, I believe, 7 and 8. And then Charlo took it from there. And he almost stopped Korobov in the 12th round. But Korobov won enough rounds in my scorecard to win the fight. And I thought he won that fight. But his last fight, it was horrible for him, as he did have a shoulder injury against Chris Eubank Jr., where he was schooling Eubank in the first round and early second round before, when he threw a left hand, his shoulder, I believe it was his rotator cuff, got injured, and he had to quit in his corner. And in that fight, he did back up Eubank a couple times in the first round, showing that he's the superior boxer. And I thought he was on his round 2 decision win, but apparently luck didn't get the best of him, and his shoulder was injured. And his other loss was to Andy Lee back in, I believe, 2015 or 2014. Yeah, 2014, my bad. Where he was winning on all 3 judges' scorecards. And then in round 6, while they were trading, Andy Lee and Korobov, Andy Lee got a lucky shot in there. It landed a hook that sent Korobov dancing around like a ballerina. He almost did like a chicken dance, and his legs were wobbly. He was just, and then he stood stiff as a board as Andy Lee was battering him. And then the referee stopped the fight. And I believe that was his closest shot to winning the world title besides the Charlo fight. That fight did go the distance, but in the Andy Lee fight, he was really outboxing Andy Lee going into the 6th round. But moving on, number 15, I'm giving it to Kamil Cesarmeta. He's relatively unknown, as he is the mandatory, I believe, for Triple G in the IBF. He's 21-0 with only 5 KOs. But when you look at his record, you're like, oh, he has only 5 KOs. But if you look at his resume, his best guys he beat were his few KOs, as he beat Alessandro Gotti, who's featured on DAZN Italy, or Matchroom Italy. And he's also got a couple of good wins for the EBU middleweight title. And I saw him fight. He fights on the back foot. He has a very good jab. And he's a good boxer, in my opinion. And I definitely think he could bring in some threat to some of the top 10 guys out there. And moving on to number 16, I'm giving it to Kanat Islam. He's 27-0 with 21 KOs. He's currently the WBO International Champion. I know I did say the WBO International title a lot, as it is being spread around. I believe the last fight with it was between Spike O'Sullivan and Munguia. Then before that, Alontis Fox versus Liam Williams. And then before that, Kanat Islam, where he won that belt. And I did see Kanat Islam fight a few before I made this video to just have a little report on him. I believe he fights very well. I'm not sure how he'll do against like the top guys, but just from watching his fights, he doesn't look that bad. He has decent power, and he definitely has some skill that he's brought in from the amateurs, as there's a lot of great fighters from that region of the 7 stands in Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and more. A lot of great fighters come out of that region, and I definitely think he's one of the greats to come out of there in this recent times. And moving on at number 17, I'm giving to Maciej Suzetski, 28-2 with 11 wins by knockout. He's coming off a KO loss to Demetrius Andre. Not a KO loss, a decision loss. He did get dropped early by Andre, but then Andre didn't have the will to finish the fight. So Andre just picked him apart, dropped the whole fight, then he lost a decision. And before that, he fought Gabe Rosado. Both fighters were dropped in a war. I believe Rosado dropped Suzetski twice. If I'm incorrect, then comment below. Maybe it was once, but I know that Suzetski did drop Gabe Rosado definitely 2 or more times in that fight. But that fight was an excellent fight on DAZN. Go check it out if you haven't seen it. And Suzetski, he's from Poland. He's another Polish fighter that I believe is in the top 25. He's behind Kamil Cezarmeta. But Suzetski isn't a bad fighter. But I'm not sure if he's going to get another title shot, as he's already lost by a wide decision in the first one, and I'm not sure if he could beat any of the other top guys. Maybe, just maybe, like Hyoto Murata, who's the WBA world champion, but probably not. He'll probably get knocked out in that fight. But moving on, I'm giving it to Esquiva Falcao. I don't really have much to say about him except that he's undefeated, 25-0. I believe he was supposed to fight February 28th, and I'm not sure if BoxRec updated that, if he won or not. But as of now, he's 25-0 with 17 knockouts. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments if he's currently 26-0 right now, as that fight was not updated, and we haven't got anything on the fight. But I saw a few of his clips online. He doesn't look that bad. He doesn't have terrible power. As you can see, he's got 17 KOs in 25 fights. And he's overall one of the better middleweight fighters to come out of Brazil, or Brazilian fighters in general, as most of them aren't too great, like Rafael Zumbano Love or Fabio Maldonado, who are both heavyweights. And at number 19, I'm giving it to former world title challenger Brandon Adams, as he's 21-3 with 13 KOs. His one big shot was versus Jamal Charlo at the middleweight rankings. Well, not in the middleweight rankings, for the middleweight title, and those for Charlo's WBC title. He lost pretty badly, as on most judges' scorecards, they scored, I believe, 119 to 109. I scored that fight 120-108. He really took a beating in that fight, and he didn't really land anything on Charlo that could really show anything in the future for Brandon Adams. But overall he didn't look too great in his title shot. Charlo really schooled him in that fight, and that was one of the only fights Charlo really schooled anyone besides Dennis Hogan in that other fight. But when you think about it, both Brandon Adams and Dennis Hogan are both national super welterweights, going in there with the middleweight to give them props. And moving on to number 20, I'm giving it to Torino Johnson. He's 21-2-1 with 15 knockouts. He's currently the NABF middleweight champion. He's from the Bahamas. Also, this is another middleweight I can't really say a lot about. I haven't really watched any clips about him. But BoxRec, I believe, currently has him ranked in the top 25. So I've decided to put him in there just because. And at number 21, I'm giving it to Dennis Hogan, 28-3-1 with only 7 KOs. His biggest fight was versus Jaime Munguia, which I believe he actually won that fight. But then the judges scored it the other way. which was pretty bad as it was in Munguia's hometown, as I think everybody knew that they weren't going to give it to Hogan unless it was a KO. But Hogan only got 7 knockouts, so they figured that the fight was going to go the distance. They'll easily give it to Munguia. And they did give it to Munguia. I believe they scored at 115-113 or 116-112. I scored at 115-113 for Hogan winning. And he really did outbox Munguia in that fight. He showed Munguia that he can't fight with anybody who moves around and lands hooks on him, countering him like that. Munguia was backed up a couple times in that fight, but I believe if Hogan had more power, he possibly could have dropped Munguia, as he did get him off balance multiple times in that fight, like in round 11 if you check out the zone's highlights of that fight. But against Jamal Charlo, it was really an embarrassment, as he came in there hopping around, and then he got clipped in round 4, and then he got clipped again in round 7, getting finished with a huge uppercut. So then moving on to number 22, I have Kazuso Takesako, who's 12-0-1 with 11 KOs. He's currently the OPBF middleweight champ. I can't really say much about him, except that BoxRec has him ranked high. I believe BoxRec before this new update had him ranked number 15 in the world. I don't have him at that rank. I definitely don't think he's that great. But I haven't watched any clips on him, and I'm not sure how he's that high ranked in BoxRec, but I know BoxRec does go off points, so I'm going to let them deal with that. But when I looked at his resume, it doesn't really look like he's beat anyone good, and I'm not sure if he's a big threat to anyone that's ahead of him. And moving on to number 23, it's Hugo Centeno Jr. He's 27-3 with 1 draw and 14 KOs. He got a loss to William Monroe Jr. as well as Jamal Charlo. Got knocked out by Charlo in the second round, and he lost by decision to William Monroe Jr. recently. And I can't really say much about him, except that he's not really a bad fighter, except that his chin isn't that great. And moving on to number 24, I have Patrick Volney. He's 15-0 with 9 KOs. He's currently the NABO and NABA world champ. He's fighting out of Canada, and I've seen him fight a couple times. He actually doesn't look that bad. He's actually a promising prospect in the middleweight division. And yeah, that's really it on him. I believe he could cause a threat for some guys who are in the top 15, but that's really it. I'm not sure if he could really beat anyone in the top 5. And moving on to the final place, it's 25-12 with 1 draw and 14 KOs, Gabriel Rosado. He's from the United States. He's been in a lot of wars. Most notably, he fought Triple G getting stopped. And that was definitely a rocky moment for him, as he wanted to fight on like a warrior, but then he eventually got knocked out brutally. And he put him in a good fight against Maciej Sulecki, losing by decision, although he did drop Sulecki a couple times, 1 or 2 times I believe so. But still, he put up a good effort, and he's always known for putting up a tough fight for many guys. And he also recently got a win on a zone card by decision, which wasn't featured on their streaming service, but I did check BoxRec, and he did get a decision win. And that's really it for my top 25 middleweight rankings. I'm MB Boxing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.